In this video, we're going to talk about the inheritance tax. Now, like the estate tax, which we talked about before, the inheritance tax is often known informally as the death tax, right? Because it's a tax that kicks in when a person dies and has to do with their assets. So, but there's a subtle distinction between the inheritance tax and the estate tax, so they're different, and I want to talk about that here. So, the estate tax is based on inherited property, and that is not imposed on the estate itself. Now, that might seem weird to you, and you might think, hey, I don't even really understand what you're talking about. Well, think about it this way, right? So when the person dies, so they're going to have their assets are going to go into an estate, right? That's just what we call the collection of their assets. After a person dies, their assets go into this pool, which we call the estate. Then we have some deductions, you pay their bills and so forth, some other things. And then the estate may or may not be taxed at the federal level, right? So there's a federal estate tax. Now, the heirs, right, they don't incur any federal tax. And by heirs, I'm just talking about the people who inherit the estate after these federal taxes have been paid, right? So when the heirs get the whatever it is they got, a car or cash or anything, they may also incur a tax themselves, right? And this is different. This is at the state level, right? And that's what we call the inheritance tax, right? So we've got the inheritance tax, and not all states have an inheritance tax, but it's just good, something to be aware of, right? So, and then of course over here we have the estate tax, right? So these are two different types of taxes, and again, it might be that your estate, you incur federal tax on it, but it might be that your state doesn't have any kind of inheritance tax, and so you don't even have to worry about this. But just know that the estate tax is imposed on the estate, and the estate would have to pay out those taxes and so forth. But then once the heirs get the property, right, whatever it is that's been inherited, that's going to be what's covered by this inheritance tax. Now, this will be calculated differently depending on what state we're talking about. And again, most states don't even have an inheritance tax, but those that do, it'll be different. It depends on where you live. But another thing that is important is kind of your relationship to the person who died, right? So this relationship to the deceased person, that may affect also, assuming that your state has an inheritance tax, the relationship to the person that the heir had will actually affect maybe the inheritance tax too. For example, somebody like a surviving spouse might be exempted, right? So if your state has an inheritance tax, if the heir is the spouse is still alive, they got all the property, then in that case, a lot of the time there's some kind of exemption, and so then they don't even have the inheritance tax. So it does matter what the relationship of the heir was, the person who inherits the property from the estate. That matters in determining this inheritance tax when in fact the state has an inheritance